Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're so thrilled that you are here. I'm Valerie Truesdale, and I have the honor of working at AASA, the Superintendent's Association, and who have the opportunity to share with all of you all today our inaugural session of Leader to Leader. This webinar series has been developed by our president, Dr. Kristi Wilson, to bring some warmth and care for you all at this time of our pandemic as we're all leading in our uncertain world and unprecedented times. Diane? We are known at AASA for connections and networking. As a trusted source of colleagues, our goal in bringing to you these webinars is to allow us to rely on each other for our creative ideas and solutions in these unprecedented times of challenges that we've never seen before. None of us has had an opportunity to lead in a pandemic. So we hope that you all will grow in your courage and your knowledge as you care for each other in this webinar series that we will be bringing once a month on this same week of each month with our key leaders in our country to come together and share ideas as we face problems of practice together. Our webinar this afternoon, our inaugural one of Leader to Leader, is on redefining paradigms in elementary and secondary learning. And we have some amazing thought leader practitioners with us this afternoon. We have Dr. Kristi Wilson, who is the current president of AASA, and Dr. Dave Schuler, who is the past president of AASA, and Mr. Keir Rogers, who's a principal of specialized schools, to bring us his point of view from the schoolhouse, the real boots on the ground. Would you go back one slide? The idea we want to put forth to you all today is that, we're all working in a health and an economic and an educational crisis, aren't we? But a Chinese symbol for crisis is often portrayed as a combination of two symbols, danger plus opportunity. We are in danger of learning loss, are we not? But more importantly, we are here to take this opportunity to build the social emotional learning of our students. And the pandemic has helped me, at least, to realize that even more important than the content is making sure every child feels safe and supported. So this crisis has presented us with much danger, but I believe it also gives us an opportunity to reflect, to reimagine, to rethink, and to re-envision possibilities. John Dewey tells us that we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting upon our experience. So here to help us reflect today are our two wonderful leaders, and we are just so fortunate to have these two superintendents and then to have the voice of the schoolhouse to talk about how do we reimagine paradigms in elementary and secondary education. Dr. Kristi Wilson is superintendent in Buckeye Elementary School District in Arizona, where it's a warm, balmy 88 today, right? She has been president this year. Being president in a pandemic is not easy, but she has so ably led our association. In the 150 plus years of AASA, there have only been 7 presidents who are female, and Kristi is our most recent one. So this is a really great opportunity for you to hear from an elementary expert. And Mr. Keir Rogers, as I mentioned, is here to tell us about how do these paradigm changes affect the schoolhouse? How does he bring that message to his community? Dr. Dave Schuler was the National AASA Superintendent of the Year, and he is also a past president of AASA. I'd like to turn it over now to Dave and have him kick us off this afternoon. Dr. Schuler.
Thank you very much, my friend. It's always an honor to be on a webinar with you and our AASA colleagues. As many of you probably know, we spent some time at AASA with the leadership team, the governing board and executive committee, pulling together a COVID task force to develop a series of recommendations for how leaders can move forward during these times. And as we thought about that work under the awesomeness that is our executive director, Dan Domenech, one of the things that the recommendations that came out of that work was the 10th recommendation was embrace a new paradigm for public education. And we thought it was very important that we engage in this conversation from a leadership perspective, because many of you on the call, I know Kristi, Kier, and I, and a lot of our colleagues are managing through this COVID experience. But you can't live in management world if you're in that same philosophy or that same perspective of transformational leadership. And that's what we want to share and what this series is about. And I think we've done a phenomenal job as president, as Valerie said. And I love this whole concept of leader to leader, because that's really what it's about. We have to share our stories with each other. We have to connect. We have to network with each other and bounce ideas off each other. Because most often when we're in our cabinet meetings or our administrative team meetings, it's trying to figure out how we're going to get till tomorrow, rather than dreaming about what next fall could look like and how we can experiment during this time and encourage each other to fail forward, right? Because there are an awful lot of things going on right now where there's no right answer. So let's use this as an opportunity. And I love what Valerie said a little earlier. You know, we have a great colleague and a very dear friend of both Kristi and mine, Dr. Gail Pletnick, who was the superintendent out in Dysart, Arizona, close to where Kristi is from. And when she was president, she really talked a lot about we have to reimagine what happens and what should happen in our classrooms. And I love just that term, reimagining, and I love that concept of crisis being a combination of danger and opportunity. So here is our opportunity to be dangerous. Let's flip it a little bit and not talk about the danger, but our opportunity to be dangerous and to push the envelope a little bit and create an opportunity to create the educational system we know we want and we know our kids need, but we haven't been able to build during these times. So Guyane, if you want to move to the next slide, from the secondary perspective, what does that look like? And I would say, and I'm going to let Kier talk in a little bit, and then I'm going to pepper him and Kristi with a bunch of questions. But for our perspective, it's, do kids need to be in school 8 periods a day at the high school level? Or are there some classes that they can take remotely, even in the real with post-COVID time? You know, and so what we've done is we've created a high flex model where students can come to take a class in a building if they want to. And if not, they can take it remotely. They can take some classes on campus and some off campus as long as they're being successful, right? And our teachers are providing that delivery of instruction to both people that are in class and people that are at home. And so you still provide this opportunity for all students to learn, but just in a very different mindset, right? And thinking about how you cohort kids differently. We have our colleagues in Kansas, you know, their public health departments in a lot of their counties are only allowing high school students to come in cohorts. What a great opportunity to reimagine and really push problem-based learning, project-based learning, which we all have wanted to do forever, right? And then thinking differently about food service, thinking differently about bus transportation, right? So instead of running traditional bus routes this year, and I think into the future, we're gonna run bus shuttle systems. Think of like a college campus, where they're always going and dropping off, and anybody can hop on or hop off as long as they have that ID. So they can come to class or go home from class right before or after that specific class they want to attend. Now there's some classes that will need to be in person. You know, you think your hands-on lab-based classes, that's great. But should all courses be required to be on campus? When we know any of our kids that are going to a 2 or a 4-year institution, we know that they're going to have to take online classes. Let's prepare them for their futures. That's what we should be all about, right? And then I think it's, and Kier will talk a little bit about this later, but I also think it's so important that we have to go to our parents and we have to go to our communities and we have to go to our students to provide supports. Because we have a lot of high school students who education is not their highest priority right now. Their highest priority is either helping their families pay bills so they can stay in their residence, or taking care of their younger brothers and sisters because they're the oldest one at home. And so that loss that's going to be there, it's a moral imperative, my friends, for us to make sure that we are thinking about what does the spring, summer, and fall look like? How can we get creative? I tell you I'll give one example, and then I'm going to pass it on to Kristi and Kier. but we've been trying to think about how could we eliminate the different leveling of classes at our freshman level. We've been thinking about it for years. And one of the ideas we had is have all students be in the same math class, but then create an earned honors option. So depending on the assignments a student takes and how well they do on assessments, they could earn honors credit. And I could have never pulled that off pre-pandemic. There's zero way politically I would have just gotten so many parents upset. One of the principals where we're piloting it, sent a letter out. It is going so well up across the board. D's and F's are down, even in this remote setting. And so as you're managing your day-to-day, write time on your calendar to lead, dream, innovate. Because if you don't give yourself permission to do that, it is way too easy to get sucked into the morass of our day-to-day. And that's not healthy for our kids or our future or the future generations that we're educating. And so, I'll share a little bit more as we go through, but I want to pass it off now to Kristi to share a little bit about thinking about things at the elementary level in that same kind of reimagination mentality and perspective. Kristi, my friend.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. It's interesting to hear you talk. I have my notes prepared and I'm scribbling all along because as leaders, leader to leader, the whole point is to learn from each other. And so I hope, one of my takeaways and my hopes for the audience is that you're doing the same. You're writing and you're journaling and you're reflecting on not only what Dave says, but Kier and hopefully others. So the elementary paradigm, one of the things that we're learning is that this is really an opportunity to transform both at the elementary and secondary levels. The crisis provides an opportunity, the pandemic. And I think that we owe it to ourselves in terms of the moral imperative, but really to forward think, push on those long-standing assumptions about when, about where, and about how instruction occurs, not only at the secondary level, but at the elementary level. And I was kind of struck at some of the things you talked about. There's a lot of parallels at that elementary level, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I also think that students and staff, they not only do they have to feel safe physically, they have to feel safe emotionally in order to take risks and in order to really, when you talk about failing forward, when you talk about really thinking about reimagining like Gail talks about, or envisioning what learning can look like or feel like, they have to feel safe in order to do that. So during the pandemic, we're talking about physically feeling safe, but we have to also be mindful of the risks that kids have to take, and educators too. And so I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of right now in the elementary level, at least out in Arizona, we have a big issue in regular education and special education for this idea of retention. And there's this looming, and it could be in the high school levels as well, but in elementary right now, there's a lot of pressure to not only return to face-to-face, but this idea of, oh my gosh, there's so much learning loss. Are we going to retain students? And that coupled with this idea of, why don't we think differently about multi-age classrooms, different grade bands, who gets access to what, smaller group instruction, which we're getting better at during the remote instructional day. Again, it really helps us to challenge those long-standing assumptions about when and how and where we provide instruction and for who. So it's providing an opportunity for real creative ways of accessing, number one, the most qualified and effective educators and matching them with students who need the most instruction and when they need it, not necessarily by traditional grade band, which I think Dave was starting to talk about at the 9th and 10th grade level. So at the elementary level as well, I think the pressure to return to normal is looming for obvious reasons that we all know about. But there's a lot of conflicts with that, not just about whether or not we should return, But there's a lot of those still safety concerns. Again, I would just push on the idea of not only being, you really need to feel safe physically, you've got to feel safe emotionally. If you could go forward to the next slide, I want to talk about a statistic in Arizona. There's 50,000 students that are just not enrolled in public schools right now out of the 1.1 million. And to Dave's point, our highest priority we've got to be able to find those kids. And a lot of it has to do with high school kids perhaps are not enrolled because they're taking care of their siblings. There's just a lot of different needs. So we've got to get creative in perhaps expanding services like tutoring, mentoring, counseling, enrichment programs, just to help answer that question of what does the individual student or groups of students need? When do they need the services? Where do they need the services outside the traditional classroom schedule? And I think with the use of technology and remote learning options, districts are meeting this moment across the country, finding creative ways to access to do that. The trauma and the missed learning that that students are experiencing, all of this is going to necessitate something other than just a traditional restart. And in our district, and I know of others, we're learning that small group instruction, personalized learning it's better meeting the needs of all students. So I think emotional support is needed, and we are working on ways to match the needs with the skills. The one other point I would just make is that right now I think we have a problem that's just as big or that's alongside the pandemic, and it's that we've got parents of haves and have-nots. These parents that have figured out a way that they're gonna be, and they are a little bit more engaged in their students' educational path than perhaps they may have been before. And they are taking, I would say, a more proactive approach, ensuring that their children have access to instructional and social emotional needs are being met. And so my concern moving forward is, parents that have accessed tutoring or micropods or structures that would traditionally not have been accessible, will those become supplanting, or will they supplement the traditional public school? I think we've really got to keep our eye on that. So next slide. So again, the theme of reimagining and re-envisioning, I think pre-COVID, the arbiters of instruction included things like curriculum and textbooks and our budget and politics, the traditional things that unions and associations that held a lot of just traditional ways we would plan for things. During COVID, right now in the middle of it, I think we're learning a lot of things. They're taking our bandwidth. But they're amplifying the haves and the have-nots. And we also have this chaotic schooling option of remote and in-person. And like Dave said, the beauty is we really do have an opportunity to dream. The canvas is still wide open. We're assessing what's working and what's not. But I think post-COVID, when we get out of COVID, there's going to be this pressure to return to school as we knew it from some, but these barriers are still going to exist. And I think that loss of learning is going to be very apparent, and we now have the opportunity to do things differently, like Dave was talking about, at the secondary and the elementary level, and it's got to be our highest priority. My fear also is that like I mentioned, the parents and other folks who have gone a different path, I would not want that to replace our traditional public schools. So we've got to figure out a way, and I think Kira's going to talk a little bit about some innovative ways that we can continue our learning forward. So from the schoolhouse, I'm super excited to hear Kira and what he has to add to this conversation.
I think Back in March when we first started, I was a middle school principal at that time, and I had maybe three weeks under my belt with remote learning. I felt like we got off to a great start, so I had a chance to reflect. The first thing I thought about, or the first person I thought about, was my sister Lenora, who was 6 years older than I was. So when Lenora was in the 7th and 8th grade, she withdrew from middle school, did not attend very much. School was just not her wheelhouse. This was a very intelligent young lady, she's very sharp. We were in housing projects near Gary, Indiana, so low SES environment. Lenore was very sharp. She moved on to the 9th grade, and by that time, I'd say mid-semester, first semester, she dropped out and she never went back to school. As I'm sitting in my middle school and I'm reflecting on what's happening, I immediately focused on the positive of, first of all, my sister would have thrived in this environment because she was not social like that. She probably would have loved the remote setting, probably loved the hybrid setting. Immediately, we found that a number of our students were being successful, and we definitely wanted to support them. So my hat's off to the teachers who made this very quick change, very dramatic change in the education landscape. When we're talking to our teachers, we try not to use the word paradigm. We like to use the, I think, Latin parigma. I probably screwed that up, but basically it's a pattern. We were trying to get teachers to understand that they had to change patterns. And I'll talk about a few different ways perhaps later, but one of the first things we wanted to talk about was there was no more classroom, there were no more walls. This was a learning environment. So the walls had come down, and it was more about that teacher trying to create this different experience for the teacher or for the students. And I've seen teachers basically take it away from being a bedroom or a living room based on the different patterns that they exhibited when they were instructing. So that was very encouraging to see that it wasn't just a shift from 4 walls into some child's home. It was actually a brand new experience that included teachers making different patterns in the way that they had carried on their business from day to day. So that was one of the first things that I felt like in terms of reimagining or rethinking the way school would happen. The classroom was definitely the first thing. Secondly, it was grades. Right now in our high school setting, we have a number of students who are earning D's and F's. And at first, we have our teachers who are very concerned about that. I am concerned about that. But I had to sit back and say, first and foremost, right now, grades, I'm not really sure what the meaning of this particular grade is right now in this situation. In some manner, we could say that we're grading or assessing students on their resources. Some of our students are doing fine. They have the support at home, they've got parents, they've got siblings, but then we've got some that don't. And we see a difference in some of the grade outputs there. So we are rethinking that particular situation right now with grades, in that we're not necessarily going to get overwhelmed with the number of D's and F's that we have. We are trying to look at assessment in totality and say there are other ways that these students would be able to demonstrate understanding. So when we look at the different roles that people would play, teacher is no longer, I know we used to say that teachers do so many other things, their mother, their father, their counselor, but that has expanded now to our support staff, to speech pathologists, to counselors, to social workers, instructional assistants. Everyone has a play in this new look and these new patterns. So we have actually taken our show on the road, so to speak, with some of our students, the ones that aren't responding like we need them to. We understand the social emotional foundations where some students are really struggling. And that's where a social worker in a van or in one of our little SUVs works with a teacher and a counselor, and we go out and we provide services for students and try to make that connection. I feel like our teachers have done such a good job of connecting with our students. We could not lose that. So we give it a day or two and see if we don't hear from a student. But like I said, we have to go on the road, and people have to assume different roles and what they're normally used to. And one of the things that's been very successful for us has been learning pods. we were one of the first high school environments to actually have the students come back into the building. And we did that at a very safe way, you know, with our mitigation efforts in place, able to separate 4 different specialized schools in 4 different areas and provide services for them. But back to this idea of paradigm, I like to use the term pattern because I think back to my sister, you know, back in the late 70s and 80s, it's amazing that some of our patterns are still the same. And now it's taken a pandemic to actually change the way people think and act in regards to teaching and learning.
Well, Kier, I think, you know, you hit it on the head too, because patterns are paradigms more philosophy, right? And so it's much more doable from you know, when you talk to teachers about changing patterns, I think that's terrific. Kier, one of the reasons that I told Kristi and Valerie that I wanted you on this call was you wanted to share maybe a second or third week in August when you were starting to bring kids back and you had somebody that didn't show up for a couple of days, and I asked where you had been one day, and how did you handle that?
Well, the first few days when we felt really good about the opportunity to have students in the building. There was no hesitation as to whether or not it was safe or not. But I felt like we had to compel the parents to say, you know, we'll come get you. I think I spent my first 2 or 3 days driving to homes and you know, I got one number of a parent. I text her and I said, hey, is so-and-so in the house? She's like, yeah, I can't get him up. And I'm like, well, if you allow me, you know, I will come to the house and I'll get him up, but I'm here. We're ready. We've got this completely different look for him. And until I think the students needed to actually see it before they bought into it. So we had to do that for a couple of days, but we drove around and we brought these students in the building. And it's not just because we are specialized schools. Each of our populations have different needs, but I think it's so very important that the community sees that we're looking at this in a different way. So that was one of the other things in terms of patterns, how we communicate with our parents and community members in terms of what this looks like. I think it's very important that we present to them I don't want to say simplified, but the remote hybrid option can look complicated if you've got your students going in 15 different ways, logging into systems and whatnot. But when you isolate things in the Schoology or whatever platform you use, and if the parents can buy into that, I think that makes it a lot easier. So our patterns in the way we communicate with the community and parents had to change as well.
Yeah, Kieran, I think, you know, that's part of this whole rethinking, right, and reimagining. And so in our district, and Kristi, I'm interested if you guys are doing something, what we found out in the spring was our parents didn't know, not all parents knew how to effectively support their students' use of technology. And so we had to create parent university courses, is what we call them in our district, you know, basically PD that we're providing to parents to help support their kids. And this is what it should look like. And in the spring, to Kier's point, I mean, it was not remote learning, it was crisis teaching and managing, right? And so, you know, everybody had their different systems. And even as a parent, I was frustrated because my kid had, depending on the class, they had a different tool they had to use. So, you know, having time at the beginning of the summer to say, there's a good likelihood we're going to be in this spot in the fall. Let's narrow it down just for our parents and our kids, so they know where they're logging in. You know, and I think that was really great and has proven to be successful. Kier, maybe you could take a minute and just tell the people on the call the 4 programs that you oversee, because I think it's unique. I'm really proud. You can obviously from his presentation, you can see why I actively recruited him away from one of our great colleagues, and I have had to send her a lot of chocolate because I stole him away from her. But you can see why he's such a valuable member of our team. But why don't you talk about the specialized schools just for a second so people know what you oversee?
So it's been such a privilege because as a middle school principal in the same community, I'd been aware of these specialized programs, but not until I actually walked through the door was I aware of the newcomer program, which basically is a program for students who just come into the country, don't speak the language. They can stay with us for up to 2 years. And imagine now someone coming in from Latin America, not speaking the language in the middle of a pandemic. Well, that particular program has one of our highest enrollments because of the, I have to give a shout out to Janice Aponte, our associate principal. She's created this environment where these students, and again, they do not speak English from various countries. They've come in and we've welcomed them to this, this new way of learning. It's been phenomenal. Beneath them, we have Vanguard, which we call personalized learning. And that is the program where I could see where many of the students have found that the home learning base for them is much better. So the attendance has been a little lower in person, but we have pretty good attendance, like 80% of those students logging in every day with their teachers. On the other side of the building, we've got our academy program. Every student in the academy has an IEP. These are at-risk students who, learning behaviors, emotional behaviors that we have really had to go out to the community to kind of win them over, to bring them in. And then we also have our life program, which serves 18 to 21-year-olds, and they are, that's our highest enrollment. Those parents were so very gracious in terms of communicating with us. It wasn't finger pointing. It wasn't, banging on the doors. It was, they valued what our teachers had given, the experience that they give those students. So once we opened those doors, those families were so happy. And the word grace, I think we use that a lot now, because I feel like one of the patterns that we have to shift is we've got to start showing way more grace with things like assessment, that let's look beyond those F's and let's try to see what else we can squeeze from these students. But those parents in the life program really just, they all educate us in terms of how we should be interacting with one another.
Thanks, Kier. Apologize for my dog. You can tell the mailman just stopped by, so I apologize for that. Kristi, as you're thinking about how we're reimagining a curriculum, and teaching and learning in our schools, we just had a physics teacher present to our school board last week on how to teach in a hybrid and how it can really be effective. And obviously there's different levels, but one of the questions the board asked her is, how much content are you getting through? And so she was able to spend some time talking with the board about the great opportunity this has provided her and her colleagues to get to the focus of, this is the true content, this is what we've always taught, but these are those core standards that clearly our students need, or those core competencies. And I'm wondering if you've engaged in some of that work at the elementary level as well.
It's funny, right when you were talking, I was writing the word standards. So I think there's a couple things. One is the opportunity to really get focused on what is important that students know and are able to demonstrate with same language we've always talked about in our PLCs, our professional learning communities. What's a little bit different now is this idea of small group instruction. For some of us, some of the experts in teaching and learning, it's like we look at each other and we just go, we've been talking about this for a long, long time. For some of our beginning teachers and some of our teachers who sort of struggle with a group of 30 students or 40 students, and it's challenging to get them to differentiate and meet all the needs. What the pandemic has really, I guess, helped illustrate is this idea of, look, small group instruction and individualizing or personalizing. First of all, this is going to allow you to do it. I wouldn't say easier, because it's nothing about it is easy, but the ability to have in our district staff come in and kind of help you use the technology. As we've always said, it's a tool. Help you organize it, help you get better at teaching it during this time and teaching it well. I mean, our conversation with senior staff today, just that very topic in terms of when we started remote in March, then we went to hybrid, now we're going back to remote next week. Really getting better at what you just said. And then providing some opportunities for in-person small group for just a few kids. And really, I mean, we're talking about completely revamping our curriculum maps. And basically it's because, you know, there's so much loss of learning going on, because you can't have, I mean, you all know this, you can't have students, kindergartners and second graders on computer remote all day. It's not, there's so much evidence out there that it's not good for them for that, for obvious reasons. So anyway, it's a real opportunity to, I guess, flesh out what you want students to know and be able to do. And I put in the chat, it's also an opportunity to reimagine what assessment should look like, align it to what you're teaching. And in Arizona, we, you know, have, and like other states do too, they have the A to F system. And I just provided testimony to the State Board of Ed on, you know, and I'm sure others are doing the same on, look, you know, if anything, we should be suspending our state standardized testing this year, because it really shouldn't be about how students performed on a test. We've always, I mean, a lot of us have advocated for that, right? And really, if you were to ask me and others, I'm sure we'd all grade ourselves an A on providing devices, providing food, providing supports, and those are not measured on a standardized test. So I think we also have to look at this moment as an opportunity to tell the powers that be, that's not how you measure student success on a test. There's so many other things. And that's another thing that this pandemic has illustrated. So especially at the elementary level, and I'm sure it's at the secondary level too. There's so many other things besides how a student performed one moment in time that are ways to measure student success. So,
you know, Kristi, to that point,
be done on that.
Yeah, I mean, to your point and to Ken's mention in the chat, you know, I'm so proud of the fact that AASA, you know, was the only organization to not support No Child Left Behind back when it was started. And I was on the governing board way back then in the olden days. But, you know, this is the time. And why wouldn't we, to Ken's point, take every opportunity to advocate at our state and at the federal level for a reimagination of, right? Because I think, and I'd be interested in both of your perspectives on this, you know, I'm not sure the learning loss is,
it's not accurate.
Well, it's not accurate, but it also is directly correlated to poverty levels and reinforces what Dan has said for his entire time as our executive director. Concentration of poverty in a school impacts student achievement, and we know that from all the data.
But the other thing too, Dave, is that, so let's just say for a moment that, let's guess that the vaccine comes in and people are better, and by, I'm just going to make this up, May, you know, we're back in business and we have some summer school programs in place, and next school year comes in. And this is the special, I have a strong background in special ed, so the special ed person comes in my mind. So this false notion of, oh my gosh, we have all these kids that need to be referred for eligibility for special ed, because like you just said, there's all this learning loss and da-da-da-da-da. Once they are in front of an instructor and they're provided the opportunity to learn, it's a false notion. You know, we just need to get clear about what they should be learning. And we need to throw out this idea of this is third grade, okay? Or this is ninth grade, and redefine. I mean, why can't we think about what multi-aged classrooms look like, and who cares if it's from 8 to 4, and you know what I'm saying? I mean, that now is the time. I skills and competency is what Ken's talking about, and it's
I'm
all
really
to assessment. It's now is the time to do this work.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, if you're looking for other leaders to connect to for your series, Jessica Dane is a new superintendent in Kansas, and she's putting together a second semester schedule that's basically students are going to take their core classes online at home, and then they're going to come in pods, so in cohorts, to do project-based learning
Great.
2 to 4 days a week, either morning or afternoon. And I'm like, man, is that exactly what we've been talking about? Like, you can focus on communication skills, you can focus on collaboration. By keeping them in the cohorts, you don't have to worry about the contact tracing because they don't leave, they stay with their group,
Well, I do think that's part of it. That's the teaching and learning side of the house. And then there's the social and emotional learning piece that has to be incorporated as well. And that's all of this part of the challenge and the struggle is people, like you said earlier, it was a really good point. Find time in your calendar where you can sit down with a group of like-minded, or you don't even have to be like-minded. You have to sit down and have the bandwidth to dream a little, because we're right in the middle of this. Now is the time, in my opinion, to get it down on paper and think about it, because it's going to be gone like this and we're not going to remember. If you're as old as I am or getting there, you're like, oh, I can't think about all of this. So you've got to, you have to have these opportunities where you can dream a little and make it a reality.
Yeah. And Kristi, I think and Kier, I'm interested in your perspective on this since you're in the building. I've often thought about, the SEL needs of our students, and we've all spent a lot of time working on that, especially now, post pandemic. We will continue to, but how we provide social emotional supports for our adults
Absolutely
is something that I hadn't thought about before COVID. I mean, I would just, give them the card for EAP, employee assistance program, and said, give them a call, right? This is a whole different level of weight that our staff have. And so, Kier, you're so good with your staff and working with your staff. Do you want to talk maybe a little bit about some of the things you and your team have done? You've got some great assistant principals and associates over there.
So we have to, understand that it's not just the students that have or who have experienced loss. The staff members have as well. Dave, I don't think you were around the other day when we came through with our little cupcake cart. I don't know if you heard about it, but we we went to every person at Forest View in this building with these beautiful cupcakes, with these beautiful signs. And I haven't seen people so happy in such a long time. People need those lifts. And I find that, again, patterns. We tend to we have specific days that staff appreciation. Now we need to do these things regularly and keep people, lifted. We now have advisory for our high school age students, because that social emotional piece in the morning is so very important. To spend that little bit of time, it's good for the staff members as well. Sometimes we have, if you're a teacher of 15 students, then you also have an instructional assistant in that Zoom with you. Those adults can be support for each other, and it is a little mini community. So the SEL is so important. I look back to last March, and we've been talking about SEL in Illinois for a number of years. One of the first states to have the standards. But those schools, I'd be interested to know those schools that really incorporated those 5 core competencies in their everyday living. When you're talking about helping students to be, in terms of their self-management skills, responsible decision-making skills, the ones that had that foundation, I believe they tend to be doing better in this particular situation right now. So I hope we don't lose that momentum with those SEL skills, because they're so very important. And I think now staff members are also understanding, but we as building administrators, I hope that we can include our staff members in terms of, keeping them lifted, because they've got quite a weight on their shoulders right now. They're great staff. They do a wonderful job. They went from going to remote teaching. Now they're teaching 2 different bodies in 2 different areas. And I think at some point I just said, oh, well, they just did it. I don't think we really realized how phenomenal that was. I mean, they are reimagining it now as we speak.
I know.
It is unbelievable what they're doing. And we have to constantly let them know how proud we are of them, because that was a challenge like we've never seen in education.
I couldn't agree with you more, Kier. We were food service in our teachers, bus drivers, food service, food preparer, we throw so much at them. And we were just talking about this today about, man, we ask them to do this week, and then next week, I mean, it's like this accordion of operations. And people are, they'll file FMLA or FFCRA paperwork, and it never ceases to amaze me how resilient folks are. And in my reflection on all of this, I'm trying to figure out a way to capture the learning, because like what you just said, when you're stuck in it, you're just trying to survive. So to ask folks to journal and find space, it's just one more thing. It's difficult to do, but it is surprising to me that how quickly people are adapting and being flexible and just surviving.
Yeah, I think, about Bowman and Deal's 4 frames of organizations, right? And during crisis, we often forget about the symbolism and the symbolic frame. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm just so lucky, because I have Kier and other colleagues who don't forget about that symbolism, and I'm not good at it in the first place. So that's really not good if I'm not good at it in non-crisis times. So think about it during crisis times. But anything that we can do to demonstrate that symbolic care, because you do care. I care deeply about all of our teachers. And I feel awful that they're not happy with me right now because of the decisions I'm making. Like, that weighs on me. Those of you who know me know I've lost tons of a hairline during this, right? I lose sleep over that, because I want our teachers to know that they're supported, and so I think stepping back and thinking about symbolism and symbols to support, one of the things I did with our senior leadership team, I don't know, maybe it was in July or August here, after we had we were like you guys, we were meeting 7 days a week, at least twice, maybe 3 times a day sometimes, and so I had a happy hour with my team. We said, we're not going to talk about anything COVID related, right? And it was great. It was only 45 minutes to an hour, but we got to laugh, and Ken and I are in a group on Thursday afternoons with about 10 of our colleagues. It can be literally the only time I laugh all week, and so I think, we need to do that too. And I said, and I'm very honest about it, when you're working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, like we have been, you're not at your best thinking, and so, one of the things I do with first year principals, I haven't had a chance to do it with Kier yet, but usually beginning second quarter, I'll ask them to tell me when they're going to take a half a day off. Because first year principals, I mean, they don't take any time for themselves, right? And yet they need to. And so I've forced them to tell me when they're going to take some time off during the day. And not necessarily a full day, because then you're going to do yard projects or house projects, right? But take a half a day, order lunch in now, I guess. I can't go anywhere for lunch, but, catch a movie, do something that you wouldn't do, I just gave myself permission to read a book of fiction, which is the first time I've done anything outside of COVID and nonfiction since March 13th, That's what we do right now. But we've got to take care of ourselves, we have to take care of ourselves and our teams, because Kier is the one that's got the day-to-day operations and making sure those programs work. And you can understand with some of those specialized populations, it's impossible for us to have staff not be outside of 6 feet all the time, and so that's important work, and then thinking through. Yeah, go ahead, Kristi.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it will be interesting, all of the I would say the shifting to paying attention to staff needs and the support that they need for their social and emotional. Whoever mentioned that, it was Dave or Kier. I know I have not done that. I mean, of course I care about people, right? Like you said, Dave, I mean, we care about our employees, but really making a conscious effort as the leader to do gratitude exercises, to do a self-care video. Those are not intentional activities I'm just going to tell you I have not done, but I'm doing them now. And I was on a COSIN call. I think I shared something that I'm doing, and I will be very honest with you. I've seen a remarkable change in people's behavior, and I think I do keep notes of things, and I'm going to say that I'm going to have to make sure I continue that practice at post-COVID, just because I think it's the right thing to do. And I'm going to ask the directors and other folks that work in the district to do the same. So we carry that forward, regardless if we're in a pandemic or not. It's the right thing to do, and so that's exciting. I think that's a good thing we're doing.
We have a great colleague who's a superintendent, and he every Monday when his associate superintendents come in, there are 10 note cards on their desk, and I think he does 20, and he asks them to write a personalized note of thanks or gratitude to 10 people that week. And they cannot leave on Friday until those notes are off their desks. And I just think that's such a great idea, And
it's great.
He and Aaron Sadoff, and if anybody's been trained in Orange Frog, one of the first things that they do is send a text to somebody thanking them for whatever, just thanking them for something, or telling them how much you care about them. And it's amazing the results you get back. Within like 5 minutes, half the people have had a response, because nobody's doing that right now, And then you always get one, like if I sent that to Ken, he'd ask me what I was drinking. So, you always get one of those, but that's okay. That's all right. Right, Ken? But as we think about, I think that my one takeaway for the group would be, you have to be intentional and carve time out of your schedules to think about this reimagination. I forget who it was in the chat that talked about, if you're teaching, Michael, if you're teaching the same way remotely and in person, you're not going to be effective. You've got to think more creatively about the design of your lesson and how you deliver it. And so, Kristi and Kier, I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions here, but I would just say to everybody, please mark on your calendar, call it administrative time, and you and your administrative assistant know that that's your time to dream and lead. A couple hours a week, and I know it's going to be impossible and you're going to think you can't do it. I'm going to tell you, you're going to be much better as a result of just taking some time for that self-reflection. It was what Valerie said earlier. I was thinking of Kouzes and Posner's research, where they focus on why followers want to follow a leader, and 4 reasons, right? The leader is honest, they're competent, they have the ability to inspire, and they practice self-reflection. And I think that's so important. So this summer, when I was working those 18 hours, 7 days a week, I totally stepped in it a couple times. Why wouldn't you step in it and make mistakes when you're doing that work, So I had to step back and recalibrate my schedule so I could get back to my halfway decent level of leadership in our district, regardless of what 50% of the people think, right? So, Kiera, how do you create time you're so creative, you're so innovative. How do you get there with all the day-to-day obligations you have?
When you sit down and you list out your priorities, it is very important that you start your day taking care of yourself. If I find that if I haven't exercised, if I haven't, eaten well, I'm not going to be any good to anyone else. So you have to take care of yourself. And, Dave does a really good job of this philosophy of fail forward. He's constantly telling us that puts me at ease to know that if I take care of myself, and then I take the risk of, rethinking the way we go about our business, I feel better about it. And I don't have that, it like relieves pressure on me. So, but I have to take care of myself first in order to actually, make good decisions to fail forward. And that's the only way that works. So the other thing is, I'm a big believer in the book, The Happiness Advantage. There's this one concept of the Tetris effect. You got to just scan for the positive. You've got to scan for the positive. And no matter how bad things can seem, I guarantee you there is something good going on with this within this construct of pandemic living.
That's great, Kier. Kristi, how do you do it? And Diane, if you want to move on to the get to the core slide, because I think that's exactly what we're speaking about now. So 2 forward. So Kristi, how do you give yourself time to lead?
Yeah,
and dream?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with being reflective in your practice. Just making sure that you're asking the right questions. I've been pretty good about that. I think we can always get better, but being okay with the responses, being okay. There's that old adage of be careful what you ask for, but I'm one that's always looking for feedback. You can ask anybody who knows me really well. I'm always going to ask for feedback, whether it's on my own personal leadership style. Just got done surveying our team and community on how can I grow as a leader? What can I do differently? What's my community? All the typical leadership questions. But I try to end my day with this phrase I've coined: progress over perfection. And I started the school year out with our kickoff, telling folks and really, really living that with, look, we're all perfectionists in our own way. And this year, you just have to give yourself permission to focus on progress. Just make progress on your own personal goals or your school goals or whatever your goals are, and focus on progress. I'm not expecting perfection. No one in this idea of grace, because you're gonna, like you said, you're gonna step in it, and this is everybody's first year. So I think it's really, really, I've always thought this, it's really important to reflect and give yourself time to reflect on the feedback that you get from folks. So that's been pretty, I've done okay with that.
Yeah, and I think, I would just wrap with encourage your teams to take risks. And if you're, not a superintendent and you're in a place where people don't encourage you to take risks, come work with us, because we encourage the risk taking. As I know, do a lot of other colleagues on the call, John Malloy and Ken and Deb. Yeah. So if you want to go to the next slide, Diane, as we wrap here. It's our belief that we can emerge from this era of finger pointing, and there is a lot of finger pointing going on right now in every community. And if you don't have finger pointing going on in your community, let me know, because I'd like to come visit. But there is tons of finger pointing going on, and we want to move beyond that and move above that to get to the point, Diane, to the next slide, where we can join hands and make the next era of public education one that will serve more, better, and for longer. And I know AASA is committed to the work. Kristi, I know as president, you're committed to the work. Everybody that I have seen on the call that I know you're committed to the work. We've got some great principals on this call. Travis, I saw you on. I think everybody else that's here, that's on the call, believes in the work. And I'll turn it back over to Valerie for the closing words. But we can do this, but we have to do it together as leaders. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to Valerie for the final word.
Thank you, Dave, Kristi, and Kier. I loved this hour of learning with you all. And as Michael said in the chat, as we point fingers, there's always 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. So I love the fact that maybe it's because there is a vaccine on the horizon. I heard Dr. Fauci say on PBS yesterday that take hope, the cavalry is on the way. And I think that the tone, it may be changing a little bit, but as we move from an era of finger pointing, I hope we do take time to reflect as leaders, and particularly with thought partners such as the 3 that were our panelists this afternoon, to say, how do we rethink? I love what you said, Kristi, that this is everybody's first year. No matter how many years you've been at leading or educating, we've never led in a pandemic before. And there is no, Dave Schuler is a phenomenal teacher in our aspiring superintendent program, but I bet you don't know how to teach folks how to lead in a pandemic. So thank you for helping us re-examine some paradigms and to rethink about how do we emerge from this stronger, better than we've ever been before. Think about the chrysalis of how we grow and morph. Kristi, thank you for forming Leader to Leader. We're very excited to have had this great panel on our inaugural session. Please do join us next month again. Everyone have a great Thanksgiving. Be safe, be strong, and be true to yourself. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Be well.